Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Well, welcome to the latest episode of Lunch with Tech Leaders. My name is Ray Welker. I'm a lead cloud solutions architect here with Right Brain Networks, and I'll be your host. Joining me is software and data consultant Tom Kowalski. Say hi.
Hello. Howdy.
And we have our business technology consultant Joel Coleman also with us here today.
Thank you so much, Ray. If anyone listening has any questions at all during the presentation, please throw it in the chat there, and I'll be sure to interject and make sure that's covered. So thank you so much.
So within this episode, we're going to discuss what is infrastructure and code and why is it important. This is part one of a multi-episode series on kind of the idea of demystifying infrastructure as code. I think in some later episodes, we can get into some more of like a comparative analysis between different infrastructure as code tools, some strategies and best practices, and what the role is of infrastructure as code within a major project. So Tom, I used to also back in the day be very much a kind of a manual, do things rack and stack style, do things on infrastructure. It feels like it was not that long ago that we that was the norm. Do you have like a similar experience?
Well, it was a long time ago. So we embraced infrastructure as code almost as soon as we moved to the cloud. So it was over 10 years ago. So, and it was a few years after that. So at least 10 years now I've been doing infrastructure as code. So that feels like the default to me now. And I don't like to think about the dark times.
The dark times.
My own infrastructure, and nothing was version controlled.
Yeah, that's kind of the stuff of like tech nightmares, right?
Yeah.
Everything's out of alignment. We have no visibility, no audibility into what's out there in our infrastructure. And yeah, you're right. 10 years is a long enough time, I feel like, within the tech space. So that is like medieval times.
Yeah, but I am reminded of it because now I'm doing more consulting work with other companies who don't have the best of practices, we'll say, and it makes me long for the days where I get more control and started everything off with infrastructure as code, and we'll go into why, all the benefits.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess really like what is infrastructure as code? What does that mean to you, Tom?
To me, it means defining my infrastructure as code. Basically, so there's the difference of change management, which, you have like your Ansible and, or back in the day, right? Ansible, SaltStack. And it kind of, well, I'm going on a different path here. It means just defining what your infrastructure is like, right? Declaratively. Some things are declaratively, some is more imperative, like CDK. But just being able to document it, change, and have change management of what's changing, right? So it's not random things happening in the console, and being able to see that and then apply it to multiple environments. I keep rambling, but that's the basics of it, right? Is defining your infrastructure as code.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's the tooling aspect of it, right? Like you can write it in a variety of different languages for, HCL for Terraform, CloudFormation, TextYAML or JSON. But yeah, it's like it is that declarative templating of your infrastructure, whereas you have your CDK, which is kind of imperative to a degree, but also could be maybe defined as declarative still, since we're kind of shaping what that end state is. But it's like, but even so, like, you have the infrastructure as code, which is the physical code itself, but it's kind of like a philosophy of like DevOps, right? Because you touched on a couple different aspects there. It's you have the versioning, and then you have kind of more of that whole model of auditability in your version control, which gives a sense of ownership, and also the fact that you can use that same code and deploy it in a way that is reusable, I guess, overall. So it's kind of like a mindset thing in its own right of like what DevOps is.
Yeah.
I see it.
And that's what makes it kind of hard for someone who isn't used to it to see, like, okay, I already have my infrastructure. What, these are the ways that I do things. I have my scripts that I run. What benefit, is there for me right now? So it is kind of hard to see that, right? It is a mind shift, like you said.
Yeah, it's definitely a shift in your thinking, because it's bridging that gap between what development practices typically are and typically how operations operates. And I feel like a lot of the times it puts the aspect of developing infrastructure more in the hands of developers, or at least it's shifting the focus of what a typical operations person may be thinking to be maybe more development focused for their mindset when they structure their infrastructure.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it right there. The biggest benefit, right, is enabling that DevOps, right? That one team that can own their solution end to end. And the beautiful thing, right, with infrastructure as code is I can have my entire project version controlled, right, from the testing to the pipeline, infrastructure to the code, all of it. As I'm making changes, I can test those in multiple versions. So yeah, it's that mind shift, that of if you have multiple teams and you have an infrastructure team, if they're kind of owning the infrastructure as code, you're not getting all that benefit, right? So it does come along with a mind shift to get the full benefits and reap the rewards, to see that value of it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of I think we should touch on like a few of those aspects of versioning and coupled with infrastructure as code, but I think you touched on the large idea there that it's kind of a cultural shift, and it focuses more on like fostering the idea of like a shared responsibility model, whereas everyone on the team is responsible for delivering a reliable system. It kind of gets operations closer to the developer's code base as well, and I think just kind of shares that responsibility is then shared across the entire team. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned like being a pretty early adopter of infrastructure as code. Have you noticed like any shifts in practices and or within like the tooling and the standard throughout that time frame?
Yeah, I mean it's always changing, right? So it kind of started off with CloudFormation, and shortly after, there was Terraform. They're like, hey, we should make this kind of a standard across all kind of open source, and like a set standard across everything, all the providers, or not even cloud providers, but even your own infrastructure, even on-prem infrastructure, as long as it can be provisioned and state changed programmatically. Yeah, and now it was always declarative in that sense, defining things with a template. But yeah, now there's very powerful things with the like CDK, and even Terraform is doing like a CDK version where you can use a bit more imperative, right? Have more logic in how things are done, more control, good and bad. I think we kind of talked about that in a previous episode, kind of like the history a little bit. But yeah, there's been a lot of changes.
Yeah, there certainly has. How do you feel about config management? Would you consider config management being a form of infrastructure as code?
So that's kind of where I was going down that path when we first talked about it. Uh, and it kind of dabbles into other aspects of your infrastructure. I'm a huge fan of having immutable servers or just immutable infrastructure in general, right? You're not making any changes to a running system, and sometimes you have to. And infrastructure code allows for that, but it also, if you're serverless environment as well, it makes it very easy infrastructure as code to spin up an exact copy of your production environment. And so that, it goes back and forth on config management and being able to change that, and kind of not having to change your code. It allows you to do the immutable infrastructure a lot easier and not have to worry about config management and the changes to an environment. I guess, does that kind of answer your question, or were you looking more?
Yeah. I think overall it does. Like, to me, config management kind of maybe strays a little bit away from the declarative nature, because it is slightly imperative in the sense that you have to provide a list of steps to get to your desired endpoint. So that kind of like, to me, in my mind, strays a little bit away from like how CloudFormation or Terraform operates, where you define what the end state is, and then under the hood, either Terraform itself or say like CloudFormation, you're strictly defining like what you want to have as your end state. Like, I guess, like, for example, like I could create a security group in AWS that lists out exactly what I want my egress and my ingress to look like. Say I want to let in port 22 from a specific host, and I want to allow maybe all traffic outbound. Like, I know that if that's in the code, that is exactly what's going to happen. Whereas in config management, you are maybe declaring exactly what you want, but I guess in more of an imperative, these are the steps that you need to do to make this happen. Maybe I need to copy in a file first, then I'll echo that into another file, and or maybe run like a sed command, and certainly replace a certain prefix within a file, or something like that. But yeah, I think in my mind, it kind of is a way of moving away from the old style of configuration to a more developer-minded approach, I think, of automation, which I think couples with like within the DevOps philosophy, minimizing, the amount of manual changes that you would have to make within an environment to make it idempotent across the board. Like I have my I have my infrastructure as code, and what I have there should not change necessarily what's in my environment when I go to deploy it. So yeah, it's kind of allowing for that immutability there as well. We're no longer, or for however many times I want to deploy, I'm going to get the same result in the end. But yeah, I think that largely would answer the question there. I think we'll get like into a lot of these a little bit deeper here in some future episodes, and we're kind of just scratching the surface of what infrastructure as code is, and why is it important. So we can dive into these a little bit deeper as well. But like, infrastructure as code kind of follows the same pattern across all of your tool sets, right? They use some sort of form like of a machine readable definition file. That's kind of like the heart of the infrastructure as code, where you have your templates, where you're defining your end state, whether it's for your servers, or perhaps a router, or your infrastructure within your given cloud platform. You create kind of a definition file within whatever language that tool supports, so that both the machine and the developer can kind of understand it.
Yeah, that is interesting when you say like across all services, right? That is one catch, one kind of gotcha, is some of them might not be supported by your infrastructure as code, and then you need to if you can rely on some type of escape hatch, right, of CloudFormation running like a function or something to do something. But that is, it's a lot better, as things improve. But yeah, usually like new services AWS comes out with, it might not be supported for a bit. So that is one kind of downside of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Not everything is maybe available out the gate in CloudFormation, or the underlying API calls it takes to create that via your infrastructure as code when you go to actually deploy and synthesize it. So there can be a waiting period there. But I think what you touched on there is also another fact of like this is a really why I kind of what I like about Terraform is the fact that largely we think of our infrastructure as like being our cloud resources, in Azure or AWS or GCP. But like Terraform like bridges that gap even more, right? And they have a growing list of providers. I don't know the exact number, but that number grows as more platforms adopt and support that. So I can have, like my logging stack. Maybe it's like Datadog or something. I can import that provider, and I can within code write what I want in my logging stack, which I think is a huge kind of shift from like, maybe a platform specific language like CloudFormation. I think that's one real key benefit to it that Terraform does real well.
Yeah, that is nice.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of languages or tools that we could use, right? We talked about CDK, where that is more of kind of an imperative approach, right? Where it kind of more so is familiar to what a developer would be writing, whether it's Python, TypeScript, Java, .NET. CDK supports that. Then you have your CloudFormation and Terraform, which are YAML and JSON, and then HCL for HashiCorp for Terraform. But like there's Palomi as well. I don't have much experience with that myself. Do you, Tom?
Yeah, I used it when it first came out, and it was kind of rough. But, I've used serverless framework. It was kind of like one of the first ones that went around with serverless.
Yes.
It made it easy to deploy and everything. So I was very familiar with that. So when Palomi came out, it wasn't on par, right, with where serverless framework was. So I didn't use it as much, but I heard it's a lot better now. So.
Well, that's really interesting to hear. Yeah, I also used the serverless framework as well for that, and kind of felt like it was an extension of like CloudFormation in a way, for what I used it for at the time, anyways. But yeah, there's I feel like all have their uses, and picking one of those is certainly a step in the right direction, regardless of what you choose. I am kind of a fan of writing your infrastructure in, say, a language that is native to the platform you're deploying to. So like I would much prefer CDK or CloudFormation if I'm going to be working strictly with AWS. But if I'm using other services or other platforms, I would maybe lean a little bit more heavy towards like Terraform for the fact that I can work with multiple providers, and it's cross-platform supported. But yeah, typically I'd prefer to write within the language or the given tool that platform supports.
Yeah, I agree. Most of everything that I've done up until a few years ago was all in AWS, and it made sense just to use the AWS native supported technologies. But a lot what I'm doing lately is across providers and other tool sets. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense now to use Terraform for some things. But yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, I would definitely say like, yeah, anybody who's maybe curious of trying to pick up one of the tools, there's a plethora of workshops out there, YouTube, lots of resources there, or more so like even ChatGPT now these days. We talk about AI a lot, but I would say it does a pretty good job at writing well-structured resources in YAML or JSON. If I'm writing like CloudFormation directly, it's kind of amazing. I can describe a architecture, and it can do my least favorite portion for me, which is how verbose you have to get with CloudFormation.
Yeah, they are coming out with actually. Actually, I don't know if I can talk about that on here yet. I don't know if that's out yet, but they are making some headway on making that less verbose, right? Adding some, I guess, imperative functionality right into CloudFormation.
You got some insider knowledge?
Yeah, I don't think that is out yet. Yeah, I do have
Okay, all right.
insider knowledge. Yeah, I'm part of like the AWS community builders. That kind of, but it should be coming out soon, I think. So maybe we can talk about that later. But yeah, I don't think it's out yet. But yeah, they are making more headway on making it so it isn't so verbose, but still allowing you to declare everything declaratively, right? Without, some things that you had to do is like, oh, I got to do this in CDK. I can do it in like a few lines where it's like 100, right? If you have a lot of resources that you have to loop through, wink, wink. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, keep my eyes peeled on the AWS what's new. Definitely looking forward to some further to that, because that is definitely one of the benefits of CDK is that within the CDK you have your various levels of constructs, and some of that verboseness is peeled away from you, because if I declare a resource, it will make the underlying, say for example, the security groups that are attached to like a target within a target group, just based on how I am referencing the object for that, it imperatively understands that there are various network connections going on and will make those resources for me.
Yeah. That is nice. And that's why I like serverless framework.
Yeah.
Right. Because of like the plugins and all of that. It was very nice.
What are some of the key features, I guess, of infrastructure as code, right? We kind of talked at a high level. It's a bridge between dev and ops. So it is kind of a mind shift take on it. So that allows for, like, I would say a wider range of value that you could have if you couple it with other DevOps strategies, right? So we talked about I think that's one of the biggest ones.
That's one of the biggest ones I feel too. And like I said, when you can put everything together from your test and pipeline, and especially when you're in the cloud and with, higher abstractions like serverless, the infrastructure and code just blend together. So it kind of have to. It just makes so much sense to version all of that together.
Certainly. Yeah, and I know some organizations have a high level of compliance that they need to make. So the fact that infrastructure as code with version control allows for auditors to make they have easy access to understanding when changes were made, who made those changes, and exactly what those changes are, as it's all recorded there in like commit history. If I'm using Git, for example, there's a detailed audit trail that can be reviewed and traced back, which helps meet compliance needs, but it also helps understand what changes were made within this infrastructure. So in the event that I am maybe taken away from a team for X amount of time where I was dedicated to one aspect of the infrastructure, if I come back to it at a later point, I can look through the full commit history to see how this changed over time. That might allow for you to better find any breaking changes or vulnerabilities that are currently out there.
Yeah, that I'd like to touch on that. That's a great point. When you bring up compliance, it's not just from an audit, but also from an operational standpoint of enabling DevOps of a single team. Because a lot of compliance, the interpretation of it, when you had a dev team and an operations team, that separation of concerns, separation of duties, it was very hard to implement. But it really comes down to you needing two people to turn the key, is how you can, I guess, mitigate that separation of duties. So when you have your infrastructure as code and you make it so that a merge change that triggers changes to your infrastructure requires, two maintainers or admins to make that change, that allows you to meet that compliance, right? Don't talk to your audit, whatever compliance specialist, but that's what allows you to mitigate that, right? And be able to move faster and meet those compliance requirements such as SOC 2 and other ones that have that. I think PCI, at certain level has that as well. So that's, a great benefit as well when you do your infrastructure as code.
Yeah, it certainly increases the level of visibility into what's out there as well. Helps meet those compliance needs a lot more easily.
Yeah.
But you touched on a really good point there, is that I think, again, it's really a mind shift focus. And by adopting infrastructure as code, you start to take on more of a DevOps philosophy where you're shifting more to the development focused side of it. So like you touched on CI/CD there, which is versioning of itself allows for more of a, well, obviously it establishes a policy internally for merging changes that are going into an active environment. So you have your PR strategy there of, I need a reviewer for this code that's going to be changed. So, hey, we need somebody to actually look at these changes, validate them, approve it. And it allows for multiple levels of auditability, ownership of what's going out there into your code base. But it increases collaboration. You could clone my Git repo of all my infrastructure if I gave you access to it.
Yeah.
Structure it so your entire organization or groups within your organization can share code. Increases your collaboration or responsibility around that.
Yes. Yeah, because I'm a fan of, we've started a new project in your organization, you usually kind of start where the last project that you did, right? The one that's furthest along, kind of fork that. And when you can, fork the infrastructure, pipeline, tests, code, all of it together, yes, that really, really speed things up.
Yeah, and I think what I was trying to get at is you touched on CI/CD, so like that in itself is a process where we can have more automated tests and deployment processes where we test our changes in perhaps a well structured account where I have a proper dev environment, a test environment, my production environment, so we can have these build processes in place that are cascading and trigger each other based on maybe a proper branching and merging strategy and tagging strategy. So properly tagging your infrastructure as code and your releases are all greater DevOps practices that start to get incorporated and are enabled just by simply using this tool.
But you know what to do, automated tests right on your infrastructure. Right, deploying it to one environment, running the same tests that you would with the code, and then being able to deploy that exact same change to your production environment. Yeah, it's very valuable.
Yeah, allows for your teams to release faster and provide just more reliable software delivery overall, which I think overall helps your organizational reputability. So I mean, it's a change that I think for the better if you were the engineer in the seat doing the hands-on keyboard work. I feel as if it's more valuable overall. I feel like I have more responsibility and visibility into what the infrastructure is, and I think it meets a lot of broader organizations to have more faster deliveries that are more reliable and meeting our targets.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's definitely a significant shift. It's been around for a while, as we touched on, but I think it's continuing to get not necessarily murky, but there's more capability added by the day, like in the sense that there are, I would say, more policy. There's things such as policy as code as well that we can maybe touch on in a later episode, but forcing policies upon your infrastructure as code, and if those policies are not met, such as perhaps a policy to tag resources, that enforces the overall desired state of your infrastructure.
Makes things a lot easier to be consistent across workloads, applications.
Definitely. So yeah, in conclusion, I mean, this is, I think, a pretty good overview of what infrastructure as code is, the values that it provides, by, automating manual tasks, allows you the visibility and insight into what your infrastructure is by using version control. That helps, again, with auditability, like we talked about, and just collaboration overall, and allows for more automated testing, and brings the ownership, I'd say, closer to the devs team and the operations team, as you manage resources going forward. So I think in some later episodes, I think we'd like to get a little bit deeper into each of these topics. Like I stated before, we can do a comparative analysis of a few of the different tools that really highlight where some of them shine and where maybe another tool may be lacking in a certain area. We can talk more about strategies and best practices. I think that could be a whole episode on itself. And again, yeah, just maybe some real life examples and aspects that we brought to organizations throughout our careers.
Sounds great.
But yeah, overall, I want to thank everyone for listening here today and tuning in to this episode of Lunch with Tech Leaders. We certainly hope you found the conversation informative and valuable, and we'd love to have you join us again for our next episode, which is going to feature the CEO of Right Brain Networks, Jamie Began, and it'll be covering the impact of AI on tech consulting. We will have some expert guests during that show and interactive conversations, so be sure to tune in.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.